Hello, I am back with another favorite book today. It is Quicksand by Henning Mankell. This is an autobiographical account of this Swedish writer. There is not an ounce of self pity or self indulgence of any sort, and I say this because Mankell wrote this after being diagnosed with cancer. Instead, he talks about the most incredibly inspiring things. He talks about the most pressing philosophical questions of our times. He talks about various other artists, the importance of art in our lives. He talks about nuclear waste. He talks about what kind of planet we are leaving behind for our future generations, the importance of history, and so on. So you can imagine how inspiring a reading this can be. I am going to be reading some paragraphs that I think are really beautiful and intense. So here we go. We have always lived in order to create good memories, not to forget. All culture has to do with preserving and searching for images from the past, while at the same time creating new ones. Art works both backwards and forwards, so that we don't forget what has happened in the past, but also to ensure that we tell stories about our own time for the benefit of those who will follow us. Since I was diagnosed with cancer, I have occasionally gritted my teeth and read about the decaying of human bodies. The knowledge I have acquired has given me a degree of calmness despite everything. Dying is the greatest of all human traditions. The actual moment of death varies depending on one's age and illness, but then everything happens to everybody in the same way. The only difference is whether one has chosen to be cremated or to allow time and the earth to combine and transform one's body into new molecules which will always survive, but in new combinations. I assume that one day I shall be cremated. I have wondered whether it would be better for me to request more space, more cubic meters, so that my body can be sunk down into the ground in a coffin, to be buried in traditional style. But I don't think I shall. Even the smoke from the crematorium releases molecules that combine with others. Eternity and its continuing cycles are everywhere. I admit that I am occasionally put out by the thought of being forgotten about altogether a few years from now. The feeling is just as much an expression of embarrassing vanity as it is a human craving. Even a short-lived visit to the bottom level of society means that one is faced with one of the most important decisions one has to make in life. What type of society do you want to help to create? That is the question that has come to dominate my whole life. Having the possibility to make decisions about what to do with one's life is a great privilege. As far as most people on this planet are concerned, life is simply about survival. That has always been the case for humans: to eat or be eaten, to be able to defend oneself against predators, enemies, and illnesses, to make sure that our offspring survive and are as well equipped as possible to cope with what is in store for them. Through the ages, only very few people have been able to devote themselves to anything apart from simply surviving. Admittedly, never so many as today, but even so, at least half of mankind now live with no ability to make choices. People living on the outermost edge of society have no choice. Lying down on the road and dying is not a valid choice. Starving to death is not an alternative either. Nowadays, we have the resources necessary to do away with such absolute poverty and lift all living people above starvation level. And yet we choose not to do so. It is a choice I cannot see as anything but criminal. But there is no court that can take action on a global scale and prosecute the criminals responsible for failing to tackle poverty and starvation with all available means. And that should force all of us to become involved and accept responsibility. It seemed to me that the only really important stories were about breaking free. The breaking free of individuals, or the liberation of whole societies via revolutions or natural catastrophes. I decided that writing was shining my torch into dark corners and doing my best to reveal what others tried to hide. I'm certain about one thing when it comes to the people who might be living on our planet many thousands of years after long and difficult ice ages. It is that they will possess a fundamental joy of life, a feeling of happiness at being alive. We may have developed no end of survival strategies, but the basic source of energy behind our successes is our zest for life. If that is coupled with constant curiosity and thirst for knowledge, we have an image of the completely unique ability of mankind. Albert Camus wrote some famous lines. There is only one really serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Deciding whether or not life is worth living is to answer the fundamental question of philosophy. You could say that time is what you make it. It's your own and nobody else's. What you do with it is up to you. You can shrug off time or take it with you as a traveling companion on your journey through life, which ends with a return to the same darkness from which it originated. Time can be a scale in which we weigh our actions. Growing older involves looking back. The memory of events and people can be experienced in different ways, like when you reread a book that you have read several times before. You always discover something new. For millions of people, it is an unattainable luxury to be in a position to set aside time for thought. This is one of the most disturbing injustices in the world we live in. The fact that some people have time to think while others never have that opportunity. Searching for the meaning of life ought to be written into the global declarations of human rights as a matter of course. How did those early forefathers of ours regard the opposite of sounds and echoes, silence? Was it important to them in a comforting sort of way, or was it frightening? Since they lived in a world that was so very much quieter than ours, perhaps they regarded silence as normal. There were no machines, no cities, no mechanical vehicles or loudspeakers. The world was silent apart from the sounds created by nature, the sighing of the wind, the roaring of storms, the twittering of birds. Nowadays, silence is increasingly rare. I sometimes wonder if silence is on the way to becoming extinct. But echoes will outlive human beings. Even when our voices no longer exist, stones will become loose and fall with a crash that is multiplied and amplified by echoes. But who will be there to listen to them? Perhaps it is an impossible dream to create worldwide civilization that isn't based on the suppression of some minorities. Impossible or not, it is essential to have such a dream. It is highly unlikely that the next generation will be much cleverer than our own, but it is possible that later generations will be less stupid than we have been and still are. So there is a chapter called The 28th Day, and I'm going to be reading quite a lot of passages from this because it's just one of the most beautiful chapters in the whole book. This is about a doctor, a heart surgeon to be precise, and some conversations that Mankell has had with him. 4,000 operations. often on tiny hearts, which he will enable to pump blood for the next 80 or so years. He starts talking about how he loves the organ known as the heart. What he says sounds almost lyrical, but essentially he is very objective. The heart is a muscle, nothing more. Just like a thigh muscle or a spinal muscle, it has a special function. It pumps blood. Then Rene begins a fascinating account of the heart's secrets, which are totally unknown to me. When a child is born, its heart has already been beating for a long time, he says. It has been working for ages before the child comes into the world. After conception, the heart's muscles start moving slowly on the 28th day, and after a warming up process lasting 3 days, it begins to beat properly on the 31st day. As precisely as that, I wonder. Yes, as precisely as that. There have been a few cases of it happening after 32 or 33 days, but if the heart isn't beating before the 35th day, the child won't live. My thought process is inevitable. When a child is born, its heart has been already beating for 8 months. All the crucial physiological processes are established from the very beginning by this obstinate muscle pumping blood around the body. Rene relaxes after his intensive week's work by sipping a glass of red wine. His smile is friendly all the time. The heart interests him. His heart, my heart, your heart. I suspect that at some time he has amused himself by calculating how many heartbeats there are throughout the world during 1 minute or 1 hour. A quick calculation suggests that the number of heartbeats for a human being who lives for 80 years is a 12-digit figure. And I'm going to end with just one line from the last but one chapter. Nothing is ever too late. Everything is still possible. So this is Quicksand for you in a few sentences. Please pick up a copy and stay inspired. I will come back with yet another book in a few days. Thank you so much.